I didn't open it for a year. Not because I didn't know it was there. Because I knew it wasn't meant for me. The safe sat behind her clothes, hidden in the back of the closet like a quiet accusation. I had seen it once. Just a corner of metal when she was still alive, shifting things around, telling me not to worry about it. She smiled when she said it. That soft, practiced smile that made questions feel like betrayal. So I never asked. That's how our marriage worked. She kept her silences. I pretended they didn't exist. And in between those silences, I built a life I thought was real. 1 year after we buried her, the house stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a stage set after the actors have left. Everything was still there. Everything looked the same. But nothing had weight anymore. Her shoes were still by the door. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the bedroom. Her favorite cup sat untouched in the kitchen cabinet, exactly where she left it. I didn't move anything. Maybe I thought if I preserved it long enough, the truth would stay buried with her. I was wrong. Emily moved differently after the funeral. At first, I told myself it was grief. People become strangers when they lose someone. They shrink. They harden. They protect themselves. But grief fades. What replaced it in her didn't. She became precise, measured, controlled in a way that felt rehearsed. Her voice lost warmth. Conversations became transactions. Every word had purpose, even when it pretended not to. She stopped asking questions about me, stopped sharing anything about herself. We lived in the same house, but it felt like we were negotiating space rather than sharing it. And Ryan filled the silence. He came often, too often, always at the right time, always with the right tone, polite, respectful, careful not to cross any obvious lines, but always standing just close enough to them that you noticed. He called me Jack. Never sir. Never anything that implied distance. Familiar, comfortable, too comfortable. Just looking out for you, he would say. Family has to stick together. Especially now. He talked about money a lot. Not directly. Never directly. He talked about opportunities, protection, future planning. Words that sound responsible until you listen long enough to realize they're empty containers waiting to be filled with something else. Something less clean. At first, I listened the way I always had. Passive. Tired. Willing to believe that someone else knew better. But something had already started shifting inside me. A small fracture. Invisible. Growing. The day I opened the safe, it wasn't courage. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter. Something colder. I was tired of not knowing. The closet smelled like her. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the safe. Not the silence. Her. It hit me all at once. The memory of her presence, her movements, the way she used to stand there choosing what version of herself she would wear that day. I stood there longer than I needed to. Then I moved the clothes. The safe stared back at me. Simple. Unremarkable. Patient. Like it had been waiting. I didn't hesitate. That's what surprised me. No shaking hands. No second thoughts. Just a quiet certainty that whatever was inside had already changed everything. I just hadn't seen it yet. The code wasn't complicated. It never is. People don't protect secrets with complexity. They protect them with familiarity. Her birthday. Emily's birthday. The year we got married. Click. The sound was soft, but it echoed. Inside, no stacks of cash. No documents. No explanation. Just two things. Her ring. And a note. I picked up the ring first. Felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe I had been carrying too little truth for too long, and now even something small had weight. I turned it slowly between my fingers. This was the ring I gave her. The promise I believed in. The years I thought we shared. She had taken it off. Hidden it. Not lost. Not misplaced. Hidden. That's when something inside me shifted again. Not breaking. Aligning. Then I opened the note. You were lied to. Start with her. No greeting. No explanation. No apology. Just a direction. Command almost. I read it once. Then again. Then slower. Each word carving deeper than the last. You were lied to. Not mistaken. Not confused. Lied to. Deliberate. Intentional. Sustained. Start with her. Not them. Not him. Her. Emily. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. Like the house itself had been holding its breath for a year, waiting for me to catch up. I thought about Emily. Not as she was now. As she had always been. Careful. Observant. Distant in ways that didn't match her age. Even as a child, she watched more than she spoke. Measured reactions. Calculated silences. At the time, I called it maturity. Now, I wasn't so sure. I remembered the way she used to look at me. Not with rejection. Not with love. With assessment. Like she was deciding something. Like she was waiting. The note didn't create suspicion. It gave structure to something that had always been there. Something I ignored because it was easier. Because asking questions meant risking answers. I folded the note carefully. Not out of respect. Out of necessity. Felt like evidence. I put the ring back. Closed the safe. But the note stayed with me. In my pocket. Close enough to feel. Like a second pulse. That night I didn't confront anyone. Didn't ask questions. Didn't change anything. Because something inside me understood one simple truth. If you start asking, they start hiding. The next morning I watched. Really watched. Emily sat at the table, scrolling through her phone. Her face was neutral. Too neutral. Her fingers moved quickly. Typing, deleting, typing again. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. Twice. 3 times. Short messages. Frequent. Coordinated. She tilted the phone away when I shifted in my seat. Not casually. Intentionally. Busy? I asked. She didn't look up. Just things to handle. Short. Closed. Finished. No follow-up. No curiosity. No attempt to include me. That was new. Or maybe I had just never noticed how complete the distance had become. Ryan arrived later. Unannounced. Of course. He walked in like he belonged. Like time had already made decisions I hadn't agreed to. "Jack," he said, smiling. "Perfect timing. I was actually hoping to catch you." I nodded. Slowly. "I've been thinking," he continued, stepping further inside without waiting. "About your situation. About how to secure things. Make sure everything's protected. Protected. After everything that's happened," he added, glancing briefly toward Emily. A look, quick, shared. I saw it. This time I didn't ignore it. "What kind of protection?" I asked. His smile didn't change, but something behind it did. Financial structure. Oversight. Just making sure everything stays stable long-term. You shouldn't have to handle it alone. Alone. I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded again. Calm. Measured. "Of course," I said. And I meant it. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't listening as a father. Wasn't reacting as a man trying to hold a family together. I was listening as someone who had just been told everything he believed in was a lie. And this time, I was going to let them talk. All of them. Because people reveal the truth when they think you don't understand it. And I was done pretending. I didn't challenge him. That was the first thing I did differently. Before, I would have asked questions. Pushed back. Tried to understand. Tried to fix whatever was forming between us. But not anymore. Now I listened. And when a man like Ryan thinks he's being trusted, he talks more than he should. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. Relaxed. Confident. Like he had already stepped into a role I hadn't agreed to give him. Emily stayed standing. Behind him. Not beside me. That told me everything. Position matters. People don't choose where they stand by accident. "So," he said, leaning forward slightly, hands clasped, voice smooth. "You've built something solid here, Jack. That's obvious. But the thing about stability is it needs structure to last." Structure. Another empty word. Another tool. I nodded. "Go on." He smiled, just enough. Encouraged. "I've seen situations like this before," he continued. "After a loss, things can drift. Accounts get disorganized. Assets aren't properly protected. And people, outside people, can take advantage. Outside people. I watched him carefully. Measured breathing. Controlled tone. Practiced delivery. This wasn't spontaneous. This was rehearsed. And you think I need help with that? I asked. Not need, he corrected quickly. But it would be smart. Preventative. We just set things up so everything runs smoothly. Less stress on you. That word didn't slip. It was placed. Emily finally spoke. Ryan works with people who specialize in this, she said, her voice calm, detached. It's not unusual. Not unusual. I looked at her. Really looked. Her face didn't change. No hesitation. No discomfort. Just alignment. The note pressed against my chest like a warning. Start with her. I see, I said quietly. And I did. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because I was thinking. Patterns. Timelines. Details I had ignored because they didn't fit the version of reality I wanted to believe. Emily's sudden interest in finances. Her questions over the past months, subtle, casual, but persistent. Where do you keep your account records? Do you have someone managing things for you? Have you thought about long-term planning? At the time, I thought it was concern. Now it felt like preparation. Ryan didn't appear out of nowhere. He was introduced, integrated, positioned, and I had let it happen. The next morning I checked my accounts. Not casually, systematically. At first glance, everything looked normal. Balances intact. Transactions familiar. Nothing alarming. That's how it works. If you're being watched, they don't take everything. They take just enough to learn. I dug deeper. Small transfers. Irregular. Easy to miss. Amounts that wouldn't trigger suspicion. But repeated. Consistent. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic. Recognition. This wasn't random. This was testing. I printed everything. Didn't save it digitally. Didn't leave traces. Paper doesn't notify anyone when it's read. Then I checked access logs. That's where it shifted. Devices I didn't recognize. Login times that didn't match my routine. Locations that were close. Too close. Inside the house. I sat back slowly. The room felt different. Not unfamiliar. Just exposed. They weren't planning something. They had already started. That realization didn't break me. Clarified things. Because planning can fail. But execution leaves evidence. And evidence can be used. Later that day, I made a mistake. A small one. I let it show on my face. Emily noticed immediately. What's wrong? She asked. Too quick. Too focused. Nothing, I said. She held my gaze longer than necessary. Searching. Measuring. Then she smiled. Not warmly. Carefully. You've seemed tired lately, she added. Maybe you should see someone. Just to be safe. There it was. Not concern. Positioning. I'm fine, I replied. Of course, she said softly. But she didn't believe it. And she didn't need to. Because belief wasn't the goal. Documentation was. That night, something went missing. First, I thought I misplaced it. Folder. Nothing important on the surface. Old documents. Irrelevant. But I knew where I had left it. And it wasn't there anymore. I didn't say anything. Didn't ask. I just watched. The next morning, it was back. Exactly where it should have been. Too exact. I opened it. The papers were slightly misaligned. Barely noticeable. But enough. Someone had gone through it. Carefully. Methodically. Testing again. That's when I understood the full shape of it. This wasn't about helping me. This wasn't about managing finances. This wasn't even just about money. This was about control. Slow. Quiet. Undeniable. They were building a case. Not against my accounts. Against me. Unstable behavior. Memory issues. Confusion. Small inconsistencies. Documented. Stacked. Prepared. And when the time came, they wouldn't take the money. They would take me out of the equation. Legally. Cleanly. Permanently. I sat in the dark that night, the note in my hand, reading it again. You were lied to. Start with her. I should have felt anger, rage, betrayal. But what I felt instead was clarity, because now I understood something simple. They thought I was already weak, already slipping, already losing control. And that assumption was the only advantage I needed. So I made a decision. I would stop correcting them, stop defending myself, stop appearing stable. I would let them believe it, encourage it, because people reveal everything when they think they've already won. The next morning, I forgot where I left my keys. Emily noticed. Ryan smiled. And for the first time since I opened that safe, I smiled back, not as a father, not as a victim, as a man who finally understood the game being played and was ready to play it better. The first thing I learned was this: a house changes when you stop trusting the people inside it. The walls do not move. The doors do not shift. The furniture stays where it always was. And yet everything becomes hostile. Not loud, not obvious. Hostile in the quiet way poison is hostile. In the slow way mold spreads behind wallpaper. In the patient way rot waits inside wood until the weight becomes too much and the whole thing gives way at once. That was my house now. Not a home. A structure filled with intention I was never meant to see. Once I understood that, I started moving differently. I stopped walking through rooms like I belonged there. I stopped assuming that what I left on a table would still mean the same thing when I returned. I stopped thinking of forgetfulness as forgetfulness. Nothing was random anymore. That was the gift hidden inside betrayal. Once the mask slips, even a little, you stop wasting energy calling evil by softer names. I began with the small things. A pen left slightly askew. A drawer not fully shut. A receipt I knew I had placed under a notepad now lying on top of it. A framed photo in the hallway turned by half an inch, so small another man would have called it imagination. But imagination does not repeat itself with discipline. People do. So I started keeping notes. Not on my phone. Not on my computer. Paper. A narrow pad I kept folded inside an old book in the study. Dates. Times. Objects moved. Phrases used. Ryan's visits. Emily's calls. Which rooms felt touched after I had been away from them. Which cabinets had the faint scent of fingers and dust disturbed. It sounds obsessive when you say it plainly. Maybe that was the point. Maybe they were counting on that. Counting on the fact that any man who notices too much can be made to sound unstable. Any man who insists the glass was moved 2 inches becomes a man people stop believing. Any man who says someone is rearranging his life piece by piece begins to resemble the accusation itself. That realization sat in me like ice. They were not just stealing access. They were shaping perception. That is a deeper crime. Money can be recovered. Authority can be restored. A signature can be challenged. But once people begin to think your mind is slipping, every truth you speak arrives already contaminated. And Emily knew that. That was the part that kept rising back up in me, no matter how many times I pushed it down. Not Ryan. Ryan was easy to understand. Men like him drift toward weakness the way flies drift toward exposed meat. He smelled debt, fear, opportunity. He looked at an aging man with assets and saw a door. But Emily was the key in the door. That was harder. I watched her in the evenings when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her face would settle into something blank and hard after Ryan texted. Not anxious, not conflicted, focused, like someone trying to hit a deadline. Once, passing the den, I heard her whisper, "He's noticing more than before." She stopped the moment she realized I was near and stepped out with a look so neutral it felt rehearsed. I almost confronted her then. Almost. But anger is a luxury when someone is building a case against your mind. If I exploded too early, I would become useful to them. A raised voice becomes agitation. A direct accusation becomes paranoia. A refusal becomes decline. So I did the only thing left. I became smaller. Not weaker. Smaller. I let my shoulders sink. I answered more slowly. I let silences stretch. I asked Emily to repeat things I had heard perfectly well. Once at breakfast, I stared at my coffee and said, Did I take my pills already? I knew exactly whether I had. I always knew. Emily looked up too fast. Ryan, who had arrived again without warning, lowered his eyes to hide the satisfaction in them. That told me enough. The medication became my next focus. I had been taking something for sleep since before my wife died. Mild, predictable, prescribed. After the funeral, Emily took a sudden interest in it. She said she wanted to help me stay organized. She bought one of those weekly pill containers, bright and simple, the kind people use when they begin being treated like they can no longer be trusted with their own routines. I let her. At the time, it felt harmless. Now it felt like a loaded weapon left in plain sight. That afternoon, when the house emptied for nearly an hour, I went to the bathroom cabinet and took everything out. Bottles, supplements, old prescriptions, cotton swabs, razors. The stale smell of antiseptic and old tile rising around me while my hands moved with deliberate care. I found the sleep medication where it always was. But the pills looked wrong. Not dramatically. Not enough for certainty at a glance. Same shape, same color family, same bottle. But medication is like handwriting. When you've lived with it long enough, you know when something is off. The coating seemed duller. The edges less clean. I opened the bottle and poured 2 into my hand. One had a faint score mark mine never had. My heartbeat stayed calm. That surprised me. There are moments when fear should arrive like thunder. Instead it came like a narrowing tunnel. Clear, cold, quiet. I didn't take photographs. I didn't call anyone. I didn't announce what I knew. I hid 2 tablets inside a folded tissue and replaced them with 2 from an older bottle I had kept in a drawer downstairs, nearly forgotten. Then I put everything back exactly as I found it. That night I took nothing. I left the water glass on the bedside table untouched and waited. An hour later Emily knocked lightly and opened the door before I answered. "You should get some rest," she said. "I will. Did you take them?" I looked at her through half-lidded eyes and nodded. She lingered for a second too long. Then she left. I stayed awake until morning. No dizziness. No heavy fog. No dead drop into dreamless black. Nothing. Which meant the nights I had felt unusually slow, unusually thick in the head, the mornings where my tongue seemed heavier and my memory less sharp, those had not been grief. Not age. Not stress. They had been engineered. That was when the house truly changed for me. Because theft is one kind of betrayal. Fraud is another. But touching a man's body without his knowledge, altering what enters his blood, clouding his mind and then preparing to use that clouding as proof against him, that is annihilation. They did not want my cooperation. They wanted my absence. From then on, I became meticulous. I hid the real medication. I left the altered pills in place. I began pretending the worst effects were still happening. I moved slower in the mornings. I let my hand shake once while pouring coffee. I repeated a story at dinner and apologized when Emily corrected me. Not too much. Just enough. Always enough. She started softening toward me after that. That was the ugliest part. Her cruelty wore the face of care. "Maybe you should let me help with the bills," she said one afternoon, standing in the kitchen as if she were offering kindness instead of a net. "Just until things feel less overwhelming." Overwhelming. I almost admired the precision of it. Ryan joined the performance seamlessly. "There are legal tools for this, Jack. Temporary oversight. Nothing dramatic. Just safeguards." Safeguards. Everything with them had a clean word wrapped around a filthy intention. I looked down at my hands and let my voice come out thin. "Maybe you're right. I've been tired." Emily stepped closer. "We're only trying to protect you." "No, you were trying to erase me politely." I said none of that. I let my eyes drift, as if I had lost the thread of the conversation. Ryan exchanged a glance with her, brief, electric, victorious. The look of people who believed the door had finally opened. That glance bought me more certainty than any confession could have. Still, certainty is not proof. And proof was all that mattered now. Because I understood the battlefield clearly at last. If I accused them without evidence, I was unstable. If I defended myself too aggressively, I was dangerous. If I waited too long, They would have papers ready, signatures arranged, sympathetic witnesses lined up to nod while I was led out of my own life. So I searched the house, at night first, then in careful gaps during the day. The study, the guest room, the garage cabinets Ryan had no reason to open but did. The drawer in the hallway table where Emily never kept anything as a child and now kept envelopes turned face down. The printer tray with 2 sheets missing and no explanation. The trash, which told me more than conversations ever did. That was where I found the first hard edge of truth. Not in a locked drawer. Not in some dramatic hidden compartment. In shredded paper that had not been shredded well enough. I stood over the kitchen bin with the pieces in my hands, fitting white fragments together like bone. My name, clinic, a phrase half visible near the bottom, capacity evaluation. I closed my hand around the scraps so tightly the paper cut my palm, and I smiled, because finally, at last, the house had stopped whispering. It had begun to speak plainly. I didn't rush. That was the difference between panic and survival. Panic grabs at proof. Survival builds it. I didn't confront Emily. I didn't confront Ryan. I didn't even change my routine in any obvious way, because the moment they felt resistance, they would accelerate, and I wasn't ready for that. The shredded document sat in my desk drawer that night, flattened, aligned as best as I could manage. Not complete, but enough. My name, clinic, capacity evaluation. 3 words were all it took to understand the architecture of what they were building. Not theft, replacement. I had seen it before, not personally, but in stories people dismiss because they sound too clean to be real. An aging man, a concerned family, a few documented inconsistencies, a medical opinion, then legal oversight, control transferred, quietly, legally, irreversibly, no alarms, no police, no crime, just a signature. And suddenly, you don't own your accounts anymore. You don't make decisions anymore. You don't even fully belong to yourself. I sat there in the dark, turning that thought over slowly, not resisting it, understanding it. They weren't trying to steal from me. They were trying to become me. That realization didn't break something inside me. It removed something. Hope. Because hope requires trust. And trust was gone. The next morning I made my first real move. Not against them. For myself. I went to the bank. In person. No calls. No online changes. No digital trail they could monitor. The building smelled like polished floors and artificial calm. The kind of place designed to make people believe everything inside it is controlled. Predictable. Safe. I sat across from a young man in a pressed shirt who smiled too easily. "How can I help you today?" I looked at him for a second longer than necessary. Measuring. Not him. The situation. "I'd like to review all recent access to my accounts," I said. His smile didn't change. "Of course." He turned his screen slightly, started pulling records. Routine. Efficient. Unaware. That was good. Because if this had already reached deeper, if they had already positioned something inside the system, this conversation would have gone differently. Slower. Redirected. Delayed. But it didn't. The logs appeared. And there it was. Devices I didn't recognize. Locations matching my house. Repeated access patterns. Careful timing. Not random. Not occasional. Systematic. "Do you recognize these?" he asked politely. I shook my head slowly. Let a hint of confusion settle into my expression. "No, I don't think so." That part wasn't entirely an act. Because recognizing the pattern and accepting what it meant were 2 different things. "We can flag unusual activity," he offered. "Set additional verification steps." I nodded. "Yes, let's do that." He clicked through options. Added layers. Security. Barriers. Not enough, but a start. "Would you like to restrict third-party access as well?" he asked. That question mattered. More than he understood. I paused. Just long enough. Yes. Another click. Another quiet shift. Lines closing. Doors narrowing. They wouldn't notice immediately, but when they did, It would matter. I left the bank with something I hadn't had in days. Not safety. Not certainty. Position. Back at the house, nothing had changed. And that told me everything. Emily was in the kitchen. Ryan wasn't there. Good. She looked up when I walked in. Studied me. You were out, she said. Not a question. Yes. Everything okay? There it was again. That careful tone. Measured concern. Yes, I said. I just needed some air. She nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on me a second too long. She knew something had shifted. Not what, but enough to feel it. That meant I had to move faster. But not visibly. That night I escalated. Not outwardly. Inwardly. I installed a small recorder in the study. Not hidden well enough to be discovered casually, but hidden well enough to avoid suspicion. Because I needed more than fragments. I needed intention. In their own words. Then I waited. Waiting is the hardest part of any war. Not action. Not confrontation. Silence. 2 days passed. Nothing. Then Ryan came back. Late. They didn't expect me to be awake. I heard them in the study. Voices low. Careful. But not careful enough. He's slipping faster than I thought, Ryan said. A pause. Emily's voice came next. Quieter. Tighter. He's noticing things. Another pause. Longer. That's fine, Ryan replied. Noticing isn't proof. My hand tightened on the arm of the chair. Noticing isn't proof. He was right. That's why we move soon, he continued. Before he stabilizes again. Stabilizes. Like I was something fluctuating. Something temporary. Something already halfway gone. And the evaluation? Emily asked. Paper shifted. Scheduled, Ryan said. Once that's in place, everything else follows. Everything else. There it was. Not suspicion. Not theory. Plan. Clear. Structured. Active. I didn't move. Didn't breathe louder. Didn't exist. Because in that moment, they weren't talking about possibility anymore. They were talking about timing. And that meant one thing. The window was closing. When they left the room, I stayed in the dark for a long time. Not processing. Not reacting. Calculating. Because now I had what I needed. Not enough to accuse, but enough to destroy. The difference matters. Accusation invites defense. Destruction ends the game. The next move had to be precise. Final. Because once I stepped forward, there would be no going back. And no family left to return to. I sat there, the recorder still running in the next room. Their voices captured. Their intent preserved. And for the first time since I opened that safe, I understood the full cost of what was coming. Not money. Not control. Loss. Complete. Because to win this, I wouldn't just have to stop them. I would have to expose them. And once you see people clearly, you don't get to love them the same way again. I closed my eyes. Just for a moment. Then I stood up. It was time to end it.